From supposed life to living life on her own terms, today we're going to hear a courageous story of refusing to settle for anything less than your best life. That's coming up next.
Hi, and welcome to the Living Richly podcast. It's so great to have you joining us again this week. And each and every week, we always appreciate your support. We've had the opportunity over the last little while to hear a number of people's stories. They've shared the journey into living richly that they've experienced, and so excited to be able to have another story today. We're going to be hearing from Kate. I know you've already been introduced to Kate. If you've been a follower of the podcast, you've heard some of the episodes in which we've introduced Kate and Wendy already. And even in Kate's, we've talked a little bit of her story, but we want to hear about the entire journey, and so excited for that today. Kate, it's so great to have you, really appreciate the fact that you're willing to share and to be open and to be vulnerable. And so I'm just going to hand it over to you. It's your story. Where would you like to begin?
Yeah, at the beginning.
All right, the beginning.
I'm going to start at the beginning. I'll start by just maybe giving a bit of background. So born and raised in Ottawa, been here my whole life, grew up in Alta Vista, pretty nice middle class family, happy parents, nothing earth shattering. I would say until 11 when my parents split up. And then, divorce is hard, but it became, my eyes opened pretty quickly to, I lived in suburbia in Alta Vista, and everyone looked the same, and everyone had these nice houses, and it was suburbia. And my mom left, and she moved into a small townhome, in a not so great neighborhood. So I got exposed at 11 to a lot of drugs, a lot of things happening around my neighborhood. And I had to grow up pretty quickly. Yeah. And that same year, actually, my best friend that I had my entire life moved away to Fredericton. So all of my stability at 11 kind of rocked pretty quickly.
That's a lot of change. It's a lot of change in a short period of time.
Yeah. And at 11, you're not equipped.
Right.
At 48,
you're not equipped. I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, we're almost not equipped at any stage, but you're right. There's so much going on in just the development of your personality, development of your security, your self, figuring out who you are at that age, and then all of that going on.
Yeah, and then growing up with two parents trying to do the best they can, and putting a roof over your head, and they're trying to do everything they can, but you grow up pretty quickly. Yeah. And then fast forward in high school, ended up living with my mom full time. We moved into Old Ottawa South, so went to Glebe, again back in sort of a different, what felt like a lot of a more safer environment. Took off, did university, and then I did the backpacking around Europe thing. So
cool.
Yeah, that was fun, and ended up in Aix-en-Provence, which is in the south of France. And I actually studied for a year. So did studying French language skills at an international school.
Wow. Can I jump in?
Yeah.
I'm just really curious because the backpacking across Europe is something that so many of us, we talk about doing something. Oh, I'm going to do this, right? So few of us do it.
Yeah.
What was the kind of trigger for you to say, fuck this, I'm doing it?
So I always knew I was going to travel after university. For me, that was a no-brainer, right? My parents weren't going to, they weren't going to finance that. So I made sure, for me, that was a goal. I knew I was going to do it, and I did it on my own. Wow. So I did I did one of those Kentucky backpacking tours. So you meet 50 people, strangers on a bus from South Africa, Australia, Kiwis. It was cool. Wow. And you just travel. We did 9 countries too. So in, I don't know, I think it was 40 days is what we did. And then the decision to do school in the south of France was not mine. It was 7 days before I was leaving, my stepdad said, do you want to go study for a semester in the south of France at the same school he studied at? I guess it was 30 or 40 years prior to that. And I said, okay. No, this is there's no internet. There's no nothing. Right. Here's your Frommer's guide. Right. Go. And so backpack.
You can't just Google that stuff.
No, there was nothing. I had a Hotmail account when I lived in Aix-en-Provence, and I'd have, you go to the internet cafe and pay a lot of money for 30 minutes to send an email. Everyone was writing me letters. Yeah. So an amazing experience living in the south of France. I'm still friends with a lot of the people I met. Eric and I were just talking about it. And I also met my ex-husband when I was in the south of France. So we met while I was there, and then he ended up moving back to Canada, where he hasn't left, and he still is here. And we did what everyone did, got married, had 3 kids. I know not everyone has 3 kids, but we had 3 kids, moved to suburbia, 2 great jobs, living the supposed life is what I call it. On paper, everything seemed really good and shiny and bright. And if you looked in, I think people would be like, oh, you're living the dream. And so that was sort of the beginning of my journey of figuring out I'm not okay.
Right.
In my own skin.
It's amazing how when I remember first hearing you use that language, my supposed life, and it was so telling that so many of us, I think so much of the population, we think there's a blueprint we have to follow, and there's family pressure, there's societal pressure, there's peer pressure to kind of follow a certain path, and yet for so many of us that path turns out to be lacking in fulfillment, lacking in purpose, lacking in joy. And I think that's a big part of your story.
Yeah, for me, it definitely, in my 30s, looking around and, I should be happy, right? The shoulds, I must, right? And that's foundational in the get to mindset, what I've talked to before on the show. And what led me there is like watching everyone around me feeling like they had all their shit together. And on the outside, I was like, I nailed it, right? Like I overperform at work. I'm super mom. I lost all the baby weight. Like it all looks great. And I am like dying on the inside. Like I was literally so unhappy, but didn't know why.
Yeah.
So the figuring out the why was the journey part for me, which really was therapy, like do the work. So years of therapy and, being okay with expressing that I'm not okay.
Yeah.
That took me years.
Right.
So it was like, how can you not be grateful for what you have? And so there was this disconnect between being grateful and being happy because I was grateful, but I was miserable.
Right.
Miserable.
How did you know? I mean, it's, I think a lot of folks watching can relate to the story of, again, having all the right stuff on the outside and yet inside feeling lost, feeling like they're drifting along, feeling like, we talk about it. We use the comment, Groundhog Day, like just every day on repeat, but there's really no joy there. What was the turning point where you went from, this is not working for me anymore and I need to get some help? And I'm just curious, like, what was that what was that event? What was that moment that caused that shift for you? It
wasn't an event or moment. It was years of work. Like, I'll be honest. I think it got to a point where I was so unhappy all the time. I wasn't being the best mom. I wasn't showing up as like a good partner. I wasn't showing up for myself. I wasn't taking care of myself. So for me, it wasn't one thing. It really was. It just took time, and over time and therapy. I've said therapy like 5 times, but it matters.
What, did you seek therapy in your journey? Was
did.
That part of it?
I believe in therapy.
I know. I'm anticipating. I can read her mind.
Yeah. But that's what it was. But I think with divorce, like I didn't tell anybody what I was going through in my marriage. I didn't feel the need to share that. It felt very private, right? And so we were struggling and we were trying to work it out. And I didn't want anyone around me, partly because I didn't want to burden them, but partly because I was so embarrassed. I'm failing at marriage. How can you fail at marriage? My nature is to overdo everything, and you're failing. And what an embarrassment.
And it is interesting because, again, even when it comes to the divorce rates, we know what they are, right? And 50%, whatever it is, they're higher now. And yet, when you're in it, you feel like you're the only one.
Right.
Yeah. That when it comes to all the struggles and the challenge, everything you're dealing with, you think, I'm the only one that's going through this, which is why we're embarrassed or we hide it and all of this stuff. And we don't realize we're forgetting the truth, which is so many people around us are walking similar journeys to us.
But the voice of shame shows up so powerfully. I remember when I was going through something similar, my marriage had fallen apart and it took me, a dear friend reached out to me, Jim reached out to me, it took me 4 months to even respond to his email.
Yeah.
Because I was so ashamed that I am basically failing at what is supposed to be the dream
Yeah.
with the supposed life. I can't make this work, and there must be something wrong with me as a result. Right?
And I think as moms too, we have that stigma that, and sometimes we put it on ourselves and create that. But for a lot of moms, it's, again, I should be performing at this. There's something wrong with me. I'm different than everybody else.
It's exactly that,
and
was
it's exhausting, and it's very hurtful for ourselves.
Yeah, it was 100% the narrative. And it takes a long time. Well, it took me a long time to leave. So it took years to even be able to admit that I'm lost. I don't know what I need or where I'm going, but I can't stay here. It got to the point where there was a tipping point where I was just too miserable. I think I talked about it on an episode where it's like, you just got to take one baby step forward into, where you want to be. And it's going to hurt maybe as much as where you are, but you're one step closer to where you want to be.
Right.
And so those micro steps were what got me there. But that moment of like making the decision to leave is still one of the, well, it's not one, it is the hardest thing I have ever done.
Yeah.
Was to walk away. Cause that's at the time my kids were 4, 5, and 7. I had no idea what was ahead in single parenting a 4 or 5 and a 7-year-old. I had no idea. I was financially starting over. We were just chatting about this, but like, do I buy the mop or do I buy the broom? Like, you're just like, I'm embarrassed that at this stage in my career, in my life, I'm having those conversations, right? It's just when you go from 2 incomes to 1, that's just the reality. And so I remember, just feeling so overwhelmed when I first left, like proud of my decision, but overwhelmed by the newness. And I underestimated what single parenting would look like.
Yeah, I still remember when it was early for me and I was cooking for one of the first times. That was never really my shtick in my previous relationship. And I'd worked so hard to try to do something special for the kids, and I burnt dinner. And I remember feeling like such a failure. I mean, it was something as simple as just burning dinner, and I ended up ordering a pizza. But I was so hard on myself because of that. I think you're telling your story, and I remember those moments where you are starting over. Financially, you've taken this huge hit. Now you're managing this all on your own, and it truly is really overwhelming.
When I think, and again, why I appreciate so much about having both of you as part of these episodes is we come at it from the male perspective, from the guy perspective. And we know the stats tell us this, is that when it comes to when couples separate, when marriages break down, that men typically see their income, the amount of disposable income actually increase, and women usually in many cases hit the poverty level or just above it. There's a totally different struggle level with a. That
wasn't my story, Rob.
No, and in many ways, but I'm saying statistically that is the norm, right. And so it's so refreshing to have the perspective from the two of you in your own journeys and being able to share that from the female perspective, because we simply don't have that.
Well, and just going from 2 to 1 income was enough. You're now maintaining a whole household with half the amount,
right?
Yeah,
right. And so that was a big. Like it was an unknown. I had no idea what I was venturing.
What was your, like, when you think back to those moments? I mean, I know what I felt like in those moments. But if you were to describe sort of the general state of affairs internally in terms of your heart, your mind, what's going on as you are now forging ahead? Again, the courage it takes to do that is unbelievable. But what was that like for you? If you were to describe the overall state of mind that you were in?
Shame and guilt. There is like this odd sense of
the guilt.
The guilt is huge. So for me, the guilt of breaking up the family unit, I learned that I had to mourn it like a death. So we were together for 17 years. I was with my ex for a long time, and we have these 3 beautiful kids. And like, I remember all of a sudden being like, I'm on my own, and like one of my kids does something and I go to share it with him, and I'm like, oh, I don't have that anymore. And my kids are wanting, they want us all together. Like every time I would drop the kids off, one of my kids would be like, oh, can you give daddy a hug? Right. So like every time you see you catch a glimpse of it, you're like, oh, I fucked that up. I did that. I'm causing that pain. I hurt you. So for me, it was guilt and shame around just knowing I hurt the people I love the most was probably the worst feeling.
Right.
And that lasted, it's still with me. I don't know that it ever fully, I don't know if the guilt ever fully goes for breaking up the family unit. I think it gets offset a little bit with the balance that my kids see me happy now. They see me glowing. They see me following my dreams. So there's that trade-off, right? Where but I still carry it. And the first 2 years, the guilt, the crying, the doubt, right? Did I do the right thing? Even though I don't want to go back, did I do the right thing?
Yeah.
I remember I sit on the kitchen floor. That's where I cry, and I do it all on my own. And that's my spot, right? So I remember sitting many nights just being like, what the fuck did you do? Right? Like literally, like it was a very, very difficult time. And for 2 years, I think I distracted. I was never home except when I had my kids, fully present. When I was alone, I was out. I was never sitting in my house. I was never dealing. I was running away from all of it, except in those moments.
Yeah.
But 99% of the time, I was having a blast. I was out just to distract, though.
Right.
Because being alone in a house that's not yours, I mean, it's yours, but it's not the family home it's very hard because I've been there as well. And it's a very hard thing to put into a feeling like loneliness. I can't even describe it, but it's such a yucky feeling, especially when you don't have your kids for that week and you're just alone. And it's so much easier to kind of band-aid up that feeling and distract ourselves by doing things because it's an awful feeling.
I remember the very first night. So when I left, I had a rental for a year. And then when I was in that rental, I remember I didn't have my kids for the first time. And I was like, it's so quiet. Yeah. And I was just like, I don't know what to do. Yeah. And so I called a friend who stayed on the phone with me while I was making their beds and getting their stuff ready. And he was like, you put on music and talk to me. And I'm just going to chat you through it. I'm like, how do people do this? Like, how do you because your life changes so quickly overnight. Yeah. Like all of it.
It's such a reminder too. We often, when it's so quick for others, can kind of look and go, oh, look at Kate. She's out every week. Look at her having a great time. And no worries. And again, we forget that often the behaviors that others are doing are to compensate or to hide us from dealing, all of this stuff. And that's where compassion becomes such an important characteristic for all of us to hold to when we're looking at others that are going through these journeys, taking these journeys, going through these life changes, that just because you see certain behavior doesn't mean that aligns with what the person is going through within their internal self.
Yeah, there's always a bigger story unfolding than what we can see on the surface. And we tend to judge people so quickly, so readily based on what we observe, not knowing that there's often a lot of pain, a lot of fear, and shame that people are just trying to dull and self-medicate from, right? I think that's pretty common. And what I love about your story is that we often hear stories of courage, right? Because it takes tremendous courage. Fear is a thing. And I think most people live most of their lives paralyzed in fear. Will stay stuck, will stay in the same relationship, will stay in the same job, will stay even if they're tremendously unhappy because they're afraid of taking it and making a change. I think courage, again, we've used this before in the show, that my favorite definition of courage is that it's fear walking, right? So it's not that I make the decision and all of a sudden now I'm the superhero with the cape on and I'm flying around saying, no, oftentimes the decision has to be made and remade, sometimes even on a daily basis to keep moving forward.
And I think I'm fortunate. I have a great friend network, and I had an incredible group of people around me after I left, and some new friends too. And they became my therapists at that time because I couldn't afford an actual therapist back then. And so for me, they were everything, and they had all been through it. So I had a sounding board. I had a community that I could chat to. And without them, I don't know where I would have been. Like they kept me afloat. They kept me going. Coming over and painting, just the moral support and the unconditional. And that made a huge difference for me during that time.
Yeah. The community is so important. I mean, and I think that's what makes it possible, but we don't always know. Here's the deal. I think some folks may have that community already. And so that makes it easier to take the leap. And there are other times where you don't have that community, and you still have to make the leap, or you're invited to take the leap, and your community will then show up. Right. But the people that surround you make such a difference.
Yeah. And it did. And I would say it took me 2 years of not dealing. And then by the third year, I started to really deal. And what I mean by that is like feel and process and not kind of shove it aside and only deal with it in acute situations, but really like, why did you do this? Like going back to those questions of like, you didn't uproot your family like this for something small, right? Like you didn't just say, oh, I'm out, right? Like it was for purpose. And so I think for me, trying to ask those questions and figure out what that was. And I think sort of, I always have post-year divorce. It's so weird, but in year 3 and year 4, but that's when I knew like, and by the fourth year, I was right. Oh, okay. Like I got this, but I took a lot of time and got this, meaning I don't have it all figured out. I just mean I started to do the work and I got to know myself. And so, and I started to pay attention to what I wanted. And that was in the form of career. And that was how I wanted to parent and who I wanted to spend time with. I got to make my own decisions. I got to, go to IKEA on a Friday, and instead of like crying in the IKEA because I'm watching all these couples walk around, I'm now watching couples bicker, and I'm like, I'm not in it.
Different perspective.
So just the perspective changed.
Yeah.
And then I think I was like really eager for like a relationship. Like I was ready. I felt like, cause I dated, but I didn't want, my kids were my priority for me. And then I had sort of 3 big things happen. In 2019, my stepdad passed away suddenly. So my mom and him went on, a cruise to Norway. They traveled all the time, and they were in Norway. And I just get a call from my mom, and she's like, John's dead. And I remember being like, I thought it was a joke. Like I could tell you the temperature outside. I could tell you what I was wearing. I could tell you everything about that moment. I remember just being like, what? And so he was 69 and he died. We don't know of what exactly, a heart attack or aneurysm, but he died very suddenly. My mom went in the shower, came out, and he was dead. Like it happened and they were on a cruise.
Yeah.
And so it all happened so quickly. And we used to, this might sound morbid. I don't mean it to sound morbid, but we used to joke around that when we were all in a family, we'd be like, okay, John, when mom dies, like you can't hook up with some young thing. Like it was a joke. Like we were always like, he was just like, it wasn't on the table that he was gonna die. Right. Let alone first. So, and we talk a lot about death in my family. I know it's unusual, but we do. So it was a shock. And when I say it was a shock, it was traumatic. And, for someone who suffers from anxiety, the things I can't control, really, really I struggle with. And that was the first of 3 big things that I couldn't control that came my way.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's heavy. And I know how, just from the conversations we've had, that you were close to John.
Yeah.
And that was a very difficult time for you as you process that. And then not long after that.
Well, then so what happened too, I just want to add, is that I had to help my mom, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
I was the kid, and with one phone call, I became not the kid. And that's, my mom needed my support to help get through. And so I didn't grieve because I was helping her just with admin and paperwork and trying to get him home, and like, cause he wasn't home, and like just helping with the funeral, like just everything. And then my mom, John was like a second father to me, like just an amazing, incredible man. And my mom and him were so in love, like even like 30 years later, so in love. So she lost her right arm, her best friend. And so having to help her navigate, through that, right? And kind of put my grief on hold.
Right.
And then COVID hit, which is not my trauma alone, but when COVID hit and in Ottawa, we had so many lockdowns, right? And so here's my mom who's just lost her husband and is alone, right? So I'm worried about her in COVID, and my mom's in her 70s. And then COVID hits and we're alone, right? And I remember the first time I dropped my kids off, we're week on, week off, and I was in my house and I was fucking alone for 7 days straight. Didn't see another human being, can't see anybody, right? And that,
like a lot of us can remember those moments. Right?
Like just being alone was like, I was like, oh, I got to sit with myself. And there were, right?
Listen to all the things in my head.
The voices in my head. Usually I can drown them out.
Yeah. I'm
no, I can't hear you.
Oh my God. Right? I can't distract. Like you could only we all got sick of TV. We all I picked the piano back up. Like there was only so much you could do, but COVID forced me to deal with a lot of stuff because I was stuck with me and I had to spend time with me and I had to love on me because no one else was going to do it for me. Yeah. So that was huge for me. And a gift, but it was hard when I was in the middle of it for sure. And then right after that, it always comes in threes.
So powerful. And I want to just jump in because I don't want to lose this thought because you said it and you said it almost so casually there. You used the word gift.
Yeah.
And I think that's such when we get to that point, when we're dealing with drama, when we're dealing with challenges, when we're dealing with all of these different obstacles that come our way, that in the moment as you just said, they don't feel like that. They feel exactly what they are: trauma, obstacles, challenges. They are a gift that allows us to basically hit a reset button and say, what am I going to do here? It's a pivot moment, these things. And I love that. And again, that's what I appreciate so much. And I know you use this with the get to mindset, is this notion of being able to now shift from saying this was bad to this was a gift.
Right.
It's powerful. So I applaud you for that. I just don't want to miss that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, it's the sinking into gratitude part, right? You know, COVID taught me a lot. John dying, again, couldn't control COVID, can't control John dying. And then my son ended up in the hospital with an eating disorder. And so, you know, we knew there was a lot of mental health issues during COVID for youth. We know that eating disorders went up. I think it's 60% during COVID.
Wow.
The system was completely overrun. We knew he was struggling. We were getting him help, but it took forever to get him in. And when he finally got in, he was medically not okay. And that's why he was admitted. And so for a month we were, my ex and I living in and out of the hospital. You know, he's hooked up to a heart monitor. Like it was just, there was a lot that was very heavy. You know, you're sleeping in one of those chairs, making sure he's okay. The stress of that, again, not something I can control, not something I can have any impact on. This is his journey, and I can get him the help, and I can do my role, but I can't fix it. I can't change it. I can't. And so those three big things for me finally allowed me to almost like step out of the overperforming, I need to make it all look pretty, because if it's pretty, then it's good, because I wasn't good.
Right.
And I was physically so unwell at the end. I remember by the third, I call them my three traumas. But after the third in the summer, I was so sick. My body, just was like, no. My body said no. And it was one thing after the other, like COVID for sure. A couple of times my body broke out in welts, like actual welts. The doctor didn't know what was going on. I had one infection after the other. And I realized my cup was so full with all the shit that I had no room. Yeah. And I actually had to say to my girlfriends, I can't help you right now. I actually cannot help you, because if one more thing happens, my nervous system was vibrating, vibrating. And I knew I needed to do a reset. And that part of that reset was a lot of get to mindset, mental reset, meditating, working out. But for me, it always will show, I know when I'm really full and I can't it shows up physically. I get physically ill.
Right.
Always.
So you said you started to, you needed the reset.
Yeah.
And here you are, you've gone through, you made this courageous decision to forge out on your own, like to not stay unhappy, but forge out on your own. And here you are trying to rebuild your life. And then the 3 traumas show up.
Yeah.
And you're on the other side of that now. Physically, your body is not doing it, not having it. And you said, I had to reset. You mentioned a few things you started to do.
Yeah.
What was that journey like? What began to shift for you internally? Because I think a lot of folks listening to this can relate to so much of your story in terms of the fear, the guilt, the shame, the uncertainty, what were some of the things that began to shift for you internally that led you to where you are today?
Yeah, I think for me, like right before John died, I was in a really good space. Like I had decided, I had bought a townhome once my ex and I figured out our house, that like our communal family home. And then I felt like stuck in that townhouse. And I was like, you know what? I'm just screw it. Like, I have 3 kids. One's in the basement. They're getting older. They're going to need their own space. And I searched high and low and found a 4-bedroom single family home. And it was a stretch for me to own it on my own. And I said, I'm going to do this for them. And it needed a lot of work, and which I've done over time. So I had started to kind of pave out. I knew career-wise where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. And then everything happened. And I feel like I believe everything happens for a reason, but all of that, I think, reset me, but I didn't go so far back because I had done a lot of work right before. So I think for me, I just knew, life's short. So you talk about getting like 3 big knocks on the head. Like I was just like, I'm not guaranteed tomorrow. And I knew that if, that I share the get to mindset in a different episode, but with Tanya passing away at 35, like I got it. But when John died and then COVID hit and it's kind of like the world could end at any point. And then being in the hospital, I was very clear on like what mattered to me. So it was, I want happiness. I want joy. I get to carve this out. This is my life. This isn't anyone else's life. Yeah. It's up to me to make that change. Yeah. And so I think I was fed up of being sad, of being sick, of being unhealthy, of being unhappy. And so I knew in my heart that I wanted to do more. So it's almost like flicking a switch to like give yourself permission to live my authentic life and stop living my supposed life.
Yeah. Yeah. The fear, again, you think of, you said, I got sick and tired. Like I reached a point and I think it's so true that until, the fear of staying the same, and the pain of staying the same outweighs the fear that one has about making change, that most of us will remain stuck, will remain kind of in our context. But you reached that breaking point and you acted, and everything began to shift for you.
Yeah. And what's interesting is the second I started to shift, the second I felt like I was on the right path, when I was off path, like where I felt I should be, where I'm off purpose, I could now feel it. Yeah. It was palpable. Like I could feel it in my body. I was like, no, that's wrong. Yeah. So talk about trusting your intuition and your gut. I just knew, and career wise, that showed up for me big time, where I was with a great organization, but I knew in my heart I wanted to get back to the more creative community that I come from. I knew I wanted to get back to like what I love, marketing, advertising. And so, I ended up switching careers, and moved into a different role. And then an even more incredible opportunity came up, to work for a creative agency where I am now with 2 amazing founders. And we're a boutique company of 5 women called Bold Lip. Just gonna drop it. But they do great creative work
for all
of your creative agency needs. Reach out to Bold Lip. But sponsored by but so I'm now doing what I love. I'm like, and at the same time, they are very supportive of me building Get To Mindset. So I'm building my the company, my dream that's been in me, my supposed life. Get To Mindset's been in me for, I don't know, over 30 years. I've tried to write the book I don't know how many times, and now it's showing up like this. And so I feel so on purpose that for me, that's like, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.
Wow. I mean, what a change.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and I met Eric. I should probably.
There's this guy.
I'm in the show notes in a like sort of a reference down below. Yeah.
I'm kidding. But you like, we met because like, I truly believe this. Like, I've told this story before, but it's like, I was doing a lot of like meditation work. And so when I thought about the partner that I wanted, there were a lot of things like kind, smart, like a million things, but one of my visual.
But you picked Eric anyway.
That's right.
I don't know.
The options were limited, apparently.
There were a lot. But the one thing I always pictured, because they say, you know, you have to have emotion around it. And it was that I pictured driving and like his hand would be on my leg. And I remember the first time we were in the car together, he did that. And I was like, oh no.
Yeah, something going on.
But I had done my work and you had done your work, and we've talked about this. I don't know that we would have worked together as a couple 5 years ago,
right?
Let alone.
So funny you say that.
Yeah.
We've had that exact same conversation.
Yeah, I wasn't in a good headspace. Well, I was in a headspace. I just wasn't as open or where I was, and so I think you and I meeting when we met a year ago was also part of that.
Yeah.
Starting to kind of like, what do I want?
Right.
What do I want? And unapologetically go after it.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. As I listen to the story, I start putting some of the pieces together. You talked about earlier how your family has this kind of this morbid, they joke around about death, the conversation around death. You have those, and then you get into about embracing every moment. And it right away in my mind, I went to Michael Easter's book, which is a book I've mentioned a number of times, Comfort Crisis. One of the books that really impacted me early into my journey a number of years ago. And there's an entire chapter where he goes to the happiest place on earth, which is not Disney World. It is, and I'm going to blank on the name. We'll put it in the show notes, the name of the village. It's a Bhutan or the Bhutan community. It's this tribe, and they are known as the happiest people, the most content people. And they have this practice where every single day they think about their death a minimum of 3 times. And all through their village are monuments to death. And you think, what a horrible, morbid place. But it's because they're fully aware that today might be my last day, that tomorrow, that they are embracing every moment, that they are seizing the experience, that they are embracing all of what can be experienced in life, because they know they have no guarantee, they have no control over when the last day is. And I hear those two pieces, and it's like such a refreshing to be able to be open and joke around and to recognize, we don't know how many days we have. And then to tie that into embrace the moment is such a powerful lesson.
Yeah. And the gratitude piece for me is I start every day, not always like really believing it, but I have my mantras that I say every morning. I am this, I am that, I am smart, I am kind, I am, and you say it over and over again. And the more you say it, the more it becomes your truth. And it's just about being grateful for what you have around you, but also giving yourself permission to go after what you want. Like, to me, there's 2 things there. Yeah. And it's hard to go after what you want because we've been so brainwashed to think what we want doesn't matter, right? We're all the ants doing our part in society, and somehow you're selfish if you go after what you want. And I've reframed that for me, and now I couldn't be more excited to be doing exactly what I want. Yeah. Sitting here, this is what I want to do
with us.
With us. Oh, right, with you all.
I mean, yes.
Oh my God, now it's
I'm glad you added that. That was because I was going to if you didn't. There are folks listening and or watching via YouTube to this episode, and they're probably sitting here resonating with so much of your story. The details may be different, but they're asleep at the wheel of their own life. They're numbing, they're distracting, they're unhappy, they're self-medicating, and they're hearing your story of refusing to settle for anything less than your best life. It took some time. It took a lot of hardship, but you did the work, and now you're in a whole different season of your life. If you were to say 2 or 3 things to our listeners that are in that place, what advice would you give? What wisdom would you share?
Yeah, I mean, it's your life. No one is going to design your life for you. It's up to you to take that step and move forward. Think about what you want. Think about truly what you want. Think about if you're feeling stuck, dig into why you're feeling stuck, and then move forward. Because at the end of the day, nobody's going to say, oh, hey, Kate, you should leave. And here's why. No one's telling you, no one's giving you permission. You have to give yourself permission to make change. So I think that's probably the first thing. And then it's movement. I always say motion. You have to take action to do something to change where you're at, period. And I talk about the micro steps and the micro actions, but do something that moves you closer to where you want to be. It can be the smallest little thing.
Yeah.
And then forgive yourself.
Yeah. It's a big
That's
one.
a whole other episode.
That's probably like 10 episodes.
Right.
But be mindful how you speak to yourself in that journey, because you will undoubtedly tear yourself apart, and your voice to yourself is the voice that matters the most. So be kind and be gentle.
So good.
So very good. So very good. Thank you, Kate, for your vulnerability, for your willingness to share and to just let us in and the listeners into a little bit of your story. If you've really been impacted by this episode, you can certainly find out more about Kate, and you can reach out to her directly. You can go to her website, get2mindset.com.
That's it.
And we'll have that in the links, and of course it'll be on the screen. You can take a look at that as well, and certainly reach out to her. We'd love it if you would take some time to like or comment on this episode, maybe even subscribe if you haven't already done so. It's a great way to stay connected with the Living Richly movement, Living Richly Nation, and be able to stay in tune with all of the stuff that we do each and every week.
Thanks again to Kate, and to all of you, and to all our listeners. Thanks again for tuning in. And until next week, get out there and live your best life.